We seem to be concentrating on the letter C. We have Katz, Copland and Cross. Aaron Copland's going to talk about some of the younger American composers. It's nonsense poems about practical cats. Joan Cross comes first, the great soprano for years associated particularly with the Old Vic in the days when Lilian Baylis used to put on opera and plays there. Later, Joan Cross was the mainstay of the Sadler's Wells Opera Company, as well as singing at Covent Garden, and she created no less than 5 major roles in the operas of Benjamin Britten, from Peter Grimes to The Turn of the Screw. Miss Cross is here, sitting on the other side of the table with me now, and the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you start singing, and who taught you?
I started singing with Dawson Freer always. He gave me a letter to Lilian Baylis in the Old Vic, and one morning I found myself walking down Waterloo Road towards an audition. Eventually I was pushed onto the stage, gave my music to the pianist and sang, as I always sang. I enjoyed singing and I just sang. And nobody said anything much, so I sort of went, and I was just making my way to the stage door when this extraordinary voice, Lilian Baylis, which was like nothing else on earth ever, called me back. "Where's that girl?" And I went back, and she asked me if I had any experience. Of course I hadn't. And she said, "Well, you can come and sing in my chorus if you like, but I'm not going to pay you anything. You're going to get your experience out of me. I'm not going to pay you anything." Well, I felt that I really ought to pay to go there by that time. Anyhow, I went into the chorus.
Don't want to probe in dates too much, but roughly when is it? Middle of the 20s?
1923-24 I started there, the season 1923-24. Of course, the great moment was when, in about 1928-29, John Gielgud came to the Old Vic. And I found that so enormously valuable because in my free time I could go in and watch the Shakespeare rehearsals, and did. And when I saw Gielgud and heard his speaking voice, he speaks like a singer, of course, as you know, and saw his acting, which flowed, do you know what I mean? I suddenly realized that acting for opera had to be more musical than ordinary acting. It had to flow through a phrase, it had to match up with the music. And something was born in me then. I felt that I had to discover more about the technique of acting for opera, and I've been discovering ever since.
How do you think productions compare then and now?
Well, productions in those days were done conventionally. Certain moves were made conventionally. There's the great story, of course, about the man who always took one move upstage in the second act of Tannhäuser. Somebody said, "Why do you do that?" He said, "Oh, I don't know, I've always done that." So another man went into this, did a bit of research, and he found that move had been instigated by some particular singer who at that moment wished to refresh himself with a glass of something.
Almost as hidebound as Gilbert and Sullivan in the
Almost as hidebound as Gilbert and Sullivan. You see, but now the drama producer has come in with new ideas.
When did you start making gramophone records?
Only just before the war. But the bulk of my records were made during bombing. I remember going to Kingsway one morning to make a record of Boehm with Webster Booth after a night of bombing, and wondering how on earth I'd got the strength to get top C.
But you did.
Well,
We'll hear it.
Nearly.
We'll hear
It's
it.
just a tiny shade flat to begin with, and then it gets there.
Take my arm, my little maiden. Very well, I obey. You love me, safe I love you.
What happened after the war then?
I thought to myself that it was about time that I began to think of stopping singing. and I just didn't really see myself as a singing teacher. But I did think that I had something to pass on from my experiences gained as an acting singer. And so I spoke about this to various people and eventually started in quite a small studio in Hampstead to try and evolve a method of training opera singers. Well, from that we've grown a little.
It's now, in fact, become the National School of Opera.
It's become a national school of
You're
opera.
back within spitting distance of the Old Vic. But tell me about the progress of the opera school. I mean, how does it work? Is it a complete training in music or a complete training in...
It's what happens
Opera.
is that they should be fully trained vocally before they come to us. This doesn't always happen because promising voices are sometimes accepted. These voices are now vetted and passed into the school by the heads of the opera houses. We have nothing to do with it. But they are then given all the training that we think adds up to getting them onto an opera stage.
What kind of-
Fencing, mime, drama, speech, languages, singing together, ensemble, production classes, which means rehearsal class. You take a scene and you rehearse it and get them accustomed to singing through the best part of an opera. The important thing for a singer when they're going from the professor's studio onto the opera stage is to sing a great deal. You see, if they're going to sing an opera, they're going to perhaps sing for the larger part of an hour during an evening, if you take the thing all together and pick out the amount of bars, that sort of thing. If you have something like Butterfly, you're really singing for the best part of 2 hours throughout the evening. And competitive singing, you've got to sing against an orchestra, against other artists. If you've never done anything but sing in a professor's studio before that, where are you? You've simply just got to get used to singing with people and singing a good deal.
Stamina.
That's what we really feel we provide.
And how many years do you take them on for a time?
We like to have them 3 years at least.
And how much teaching do you personally do?
I teach about 12 hours a week. It's quite interesting. You have a class, we'll say, in Rigoletto, to begin with, first act of Rigoletto with a soprano and a tenor. Then you find that somebody brings you a certain section of Othello, perhaps his monologue, something like that, in the second act, third act. Then you have somebody bringing the trio, or 3 people bringing the trio from Rosencavalier. You jump about like a lunatic from things to other. But that's the job, you see. You must know your repertoire.
What do you look for, then, in a young student? I mean, if you've got to choose between 2 students, what is the kind of thing you're looking for?
Voice.
Voice. But I've always thought of you as an actress, singer, rather than a singer pure and simple. I mean, it's what you've given.
This is very difficult, you know, because some people are endowed with, by God or something like that, with acting ability. But you see, you have some people who are not naturally gifted as an actress or an actor, but who have wonderful voices. Well, then I think the idea is to make them look as though they were acting. Or do your best to do that. And if you get them accustomed to moving around the stage, accustomed to using their hands, accustomed to a good carriage, to facial expression, that goes part of the way. But you can't turn all good singers into first-class actors and actresses. It's not possible.
What would you do if they put you in charge of Covent Garden? What would be the
Die.
first 3 things? Oh, apart from dying.
I simply couldn't. I'm too old. I haven't got the enthusiasm or the mind for it. If you want to know what I would do if somebody gave me a great deal of money suddenly, I would at once gather together a company of young singers, inexperienced singers, put them under splendid guidance, give them some kind of an orchestra, and send them about to perform, but to perform in absolutely professional circumstances, under guidance, so that these young people could develop as young artists, as young personalities, without having to compete against experienced singers who've formed certain conventions, certain habits, and who show them up immediately as inexperienced people. I would most certainly form a junior opera company.
I wish you would. Well, Joan, thank you very much indeed. I had the idea now that we might play part of The Turn of the Screw, Britain's opera, since it was the last role that you created. So here is Mrs. Groves, the housekeeper, with the two young children, Miles and Flora. All three of them are awaiting the arrival of the new governess. The children are excited and running circles round Mrs. Groves, played, of course, by Joan Cross. That was Joan Cross singing in The Turn of the Screw. And now here, for a change, is a complete piece of music. Growltiger's Last Stand. The poem by T.S. Eliot is spoken by Bernard Keefe. The music is by Humphrey Searle.
Growltiger was a bravo cat who travelled on a barge. In fact, he was the roughest cat that ever roamed at large. From Gravesend up to Oxford, he pursued his evil aims, rejoicing in the title of the Terror of the Thames. His manners and appearance did not calculate to please. His coat was torn and seedy, he was baggy at the knees. One ear was somewhat missing, no need to tell you why, and he scowled upon a hostile world with one forbidding eye. The cottagers of Rotherhithe knew something of his fame. At Hammersmith and Putney, people shuddered at his name. They would fortify the hen house, lock up the silly goose, when the rumour ran along the shore, Growltigers on the loose! Woe to the weak canary that fluttered from its cage! Woe to the pampered Pekingese that faced Growltiger's rage! Woe to the bristly bandicoot that lurks on foreign ships! And woe to any cat with whom Growltiger came to grips! But most to cats of foreign race his hatred had been vowed. To cats of foreign name and race no quarter was allowed. The Persian and the Siamese regarded him with fear, because it was a Siamese that mauled his missing ear. Now on a peaceful summer night, all nature seemed at play. The tender moon was shining bright, the barge at Molesey lay. All in the balmy moonlight it lay rocking on the tide. And Growltiger was disposed to show his sentimental side. His bucko mate, Grumbuskin, long since had disappeared. For to the Bell at Hampton he had gone to wet his beard. And his boatswain, Tumble Brutus, he too had stolen away. In the yard behind the Lion he was growling for his prey. In the forepeak of the vessel, Growltiger sat alone, concentrating his attention on the Lady Griddlemoon. And his raffish crew were sleeping in their barrels and their bunks. As the Siamese came creeping in their sampans and their junks. Growltiger had no eye or ear for aught but Griddlemoon, and the lady seemed enraptured by his manly bearing. to relaxation and awaiting no surprise. But the moonlight shone reflected from 1,000 bright blue eyes. And closer still and closer the sampan circled round, and yet from all the enemy there was not heard a sound. The lovers sang their last duet in danger of their lives, for the foe was armed with toasting forks and cruel carving knives. Then Gilbert gave the signal to his fierce Mongolian horde. With a frightful burst of fireworks, the Chinks they swarmed aboard. Abandoning their sampans and their pullaways and junks, they battened down the hatches on the crew within the bunks. Then Griddlebone, she gave a screech, for she was badly scared. I'm sorry to admit it, but she quickly disappeared. She probably escaped with ease, I'm sure she was not drowned. But a serried ring of flashing steel Growltiger did surround. The ruthless foe pressed forward in stubborn rank on rank. Growltiger, to his vast surprise, was forced to walk the plank. He who 100 victims had driven to that drop, at the end of all his crimes was forced to go ka-flip, ka-flop. Oh, there was joy and whopping when the news fell through the land. At Maidenhead and Henley there was dancing on the Strand. Brats were roasted whole at Brentford and at Victoria Dock, and a day of celebration was commanded in Bangkok.
T.S. Eliot's poem was set to music by Humphrey Searle. I wonder if you noticed that there were only 3 players in that piece. Flute and piccolo, played by Harold Clark, cello, Joy Hall, guitar, John Williams. The speaker was Bernard Keefe. And now Aaron Copland is going to give us a chance to catch up on some of the younger generation of American composers. Vaughan Williams always used to say that a composer is always called young until his 60th birthday, when overnight he becomes a veteran. But Mr. Copland may gauge it differently.
I thought I would define the youngest generation of American composers as any young man 35 or under. They live, I think, within the world scene in music. They know very well what's going on abroad, and their styles and techniques show the influence of the various techniques in composition. For example, one will find our composers making use of the serial technique introduced by Schoenberg and Webern. You will find experimentation in electronic music of various kinds. You will find a kind of cross-fertilization of jazz and classical music in the work of some of the composers, and you will also find a kind of far-out experimentalism among the pupils and disciples of John Cage. The only thing that you won't find, I think, is an interest in nationalism or neoclassicism. Both those interests, which were very current perhaps 10 or 20 years ago, seem to have died away. Our young men, I think, have certain definite advantages over the members of the older generation. In the first place, they get a certain assurance from what happened 20 years ago. That is to say, they feel that American music has been established by the older generation and that they can profit by the experiences of that generation. They have inducements, many inducements, in prizes and scholarships, and many of them have jobs and festivals of their music in colleges and universities. They also are occupied with producing music that is needed for films or TV presentation or ballet or stage works. And therefore, the numbers of opportunities for the use of their music is considerable. Nevertheless, the main problem of the young composer remains about what it has always been, namely, how to get your piece presented publicly in an adequate performance. There are many names that I could mention, but I think it's better if we concentrate on perhaps 3. The first is Billy Jim Layton. Billy Jim is, I suppose, a Texas name, rather unusual for a composer. At any rate, Billy Jim Layton was born in Texas, but he was taught at Harvard University and finally gained the Prix de Rome. He's an extremely cultivated young man, and at present is on the teaching staff at Harvard University. His string quartet seems to me a daring work. It's daring because of the kind of harmonic language it uses. It's very well thought out, it's very clear in structure, and it's very expressive in almost familiar way. One understands the meaning behind the notes, I believe. Here is a section from Billy Jim Layton's string quartet. Salvatore Martirano, despite his rather Italianate name, was born in New York, and he was the pupil of Roger Sessions and also studied at the Eastman School of Music. He has written several works, especially a mass, which I think is a remarkable achievement. It was performed for the first time on the Hamburg radio. More recently, his Shakespearean Rag, a work for a small group of singers and 7 instruments, was chosen by the ISCM for its Vienna Festival in June 1961. Gunther Schuller is another young composer whose music has begun to be heard in our country. Schuller is a rather special case in that he seems to be just as fond of the jazz idiom as he is of the classical idiom. He grew up in a classical atmosphere because his father has been a member for many years of the string section of the New York Philharmonic. Schuller believes that jazz is basically an improvised music, and he tries to combine in his works, some of them, a kind of improvised jazz against a symphonic accompaniment. His Concerto for Jazz, Quartet, and Orchestra is a typical work. This kind of combination music has begun to be called third stream music, a rather good title for music which attempts to combine the best of both fields. It's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes these two idioms fight each other, but Schuller has done it about as well as one can. He himself earned his living as a French hornist, and he understands the brass instruments brilliantly. I want you to hear part of his Symphony for Brass and Percussion. This work was written when he was 25 years old and makes a striking use of qualities in the brass instruments not often called for by composers. It calls, for example, for extraordinary agility and technical dexterity. This work is set for an orchestra that consists of 4 horns, 6 trumpets, 3 trombones, a baritone, 2 tubas, and percussion instruments. in considering the youngest generation of American composers, I might say that there isn't a great deal of difference between what they are doing, what they're up to, and what my observations lead me to think that the young British composers are up to. They both have members who are more conservative and members of the generation who are much more radical. I think that probably the thing that binds them together is this sense of the wide latitude in style and the possibility of writing various kinds of music. It's a generation whose future concerns me and interests me greatly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Copland. Certainly enjoyed that Schuller piece enormously. Well, that brings us to the close of this particular Talking About Music, in which you also heard Joan Cross and Eliot's poem, Growltiger's Last Stand, set by the British composer Humphrey Soule. So this is John Amis saying goodbye from London.